Hello, and welcome to week 6 here in positive psychology, taking on chapter 6, kind of mistitled, as, mental health and well being. And what this chapter is really going to explore is irrational thinking that gets in the way of well being. So I start off introducing you to one of my own theories related to human development that I call puzzle pieces, and one of its original ideas, and that was that when I engaged in a very close, intimate relationship with someone, I discovered that there were aspects of my identity and behavior, and their identity and their behavior that revealed themselves that were not present before. Now, this, of course, reflects some lack of maturity and certainly some dysfunction associated with those relationships. But nonetheless, it got me thinking about this idea of the sort of irrational beliefs that I had, or they had, or both of us had about how relationships are supposed to work and where that comes from. That dovetailed with the work that I was doing at that time. I was in college and I was studying the work of Albert Ellis, which is the person we're going to be talking about today. So, a core part of my puzzle pieces theory having to do with relationships is that there's a set of irrational beliefs that take over, or they reveal themselves in our personality and our behavior when we are in uh, exclusively when we're in intimate relationships. I conclude that that's probably because of the increased vulnerability, defensiveness, anything that's historical in our lives that have to do with relationships and whatnot. Those come to the fore, and things can get pretty dysfunctional. So I start off with that, and I'm going to be asking you to reflect on that concept yourself. The idea that I exist, I have an identity, but there's part of that identity that has been shaped specifically for when I'm in a close relationship with somebody. And the relative health of those particular things has a lot to do with the way in which I give myself messages as to what my behavior is supposed to be, what their behavior is supposed to be. So we enter into the course with the statement that I made in the beginning of the chapter, and that was that happily ever after is irrational. It's one of those uh, favored statements that we have from our fairy tale days and many movies and television shows and whatnot. That message is repeated, that the ultimate end to the pursuits that we see in these stories is that we live happily ever after. And that is one of the principal irrational thoughts that we encounter. Now, these irrational thoughts are built up from experience. They also come from our looking glass committee. Individuals' expectations or your perceived expectations of them can create irrational thoughts as to the kind of person and the kind of behavior you're supposed to do. So let's jump right into rational emotive behavior theory, but it's also a form of counseling. So rational behavior, rational emotive behavior theory, rational emotive behavior therapy, produced by Albert Ellis. Now, it's a behavioral therapy, so we can still draw upon our behavioral knowledge of the ABC contingency theory under certain circumstances with instructions. A, we perform B, behavior, and there are consequences. And that model, that operant conditioning model, can be used to explain and modify behavior very effectively. Albert Ellis comes along and he replaces the B with beliefs about something, these irrational beliefs. So, under certain circumstances, This is what we believe is supposed to happen, and there are consequences related to that, particularly if we have irrational beliefs in that scenario that rarely actually manifest as true. So the consequence can be riddled with disappointment and whatnot because the world is not living up to our irrational expectations. Now, among many, many versions of the kinds of irrational beliefs that Albert Ellis talked about, I found a source. Let's take a look at this source. This is a link that I have in the course. This is Albert Ellis Irrational Beliefs Table. This is a selection of the types of irrational beliefs that people can incorporate into their identity. I suggest you read all that, but let's take a look at them. There's 12 of them here. Now look at this one. Number 1, the idea that it is a dire necessity for adults to be loved by significant others for almost everything they do. Does it sound crazy? Yes. Do people believe this is true and act accordingly? Yes. All the time. When you're in a relationship, this is part of that. What do you mean you're mad at what I did? We're in a relationship. We're supposed to live happily ever after. All of these things having to do with what we've learned, expectations, in our interactions with other people. So let's take a look at another one here. We have 3. Look at the idea that it is horrible when things are not the way we like them to be. Who can relate to that? What you have to understand, if you look at these as written, there's almost everyone would look and say, that's stupid, that's irrational. But their behavior may reflect that in some circumstances, this is their reality, these expectations. So it's going to take some reflection on your part to see under what circumstances might I actually hold these irrational beliefs. And my opinion is that we all have some irrational beliefs and we operate on those. Sometimes they're problematic. So the response to that is, from Albert Ellis's perspective, his point in therapy was to dispute the irrational belief, replace it with a more rational belief, and then focus on the consequences of that. Certainly, more rational beliefs lead to more positive consequences. On this document, let's take a look again on that document. On the left-hand side, you have the irrational beliefs, but over here on the right-hand side, you have rational beliefs that counter those. So if we look at the idea that it is a dire necessity for adults to be loved by significant others for almost everything they do, instead of their concentrating on their own self-respect or winning approval for practical purposes and on loving rather than on being loved. So people will hold the irrational belief instead of the accompanying rational belief. So in the process of counseling, when we do an applied RET, then we can help people identify rational beliefs. Now there's a tool that I'm going to ask you to explore, and it is the Rational Emotional Behavior Theory self-help tool. And it's simply a form that you fill out. You are generating all of the information that will go onto this form that's coming from you. So it's going to require you to look at a situation in which you have irrational beliefs or it's problematic. And the reason it's problematic emotionally for you is because there are irrational beliefs. Like a common one, and this may help you figure out which one you want to use. A common one is you have to fix it. But you can't fix it. That kind of situation is ideal for this kind of exercise, where there's something going on in your world, people have made choices driving you nuts, and you are powerless. And that continued need to fix in a scenario where you can't fix it is a is a clashing scenario. This is very much like Freud talked about in terms of the superego and the id clashing. What I want to do and what reality says. These are repeated themes through a lot of the different theories within psychology, sometimes just clarifying the language so that it can be more easily utilized. So what I took the REBT, this is this is the form. What I did is I made believe that every student who has ever taken a class from me has to absolutely love me and think that that I'm the best professor ever. That's that would be an irrational belief. It's not a real belief. I don't have that belief. However, I am responsive to feedback, and when somebody tells me they didn't like what I did or they're challenging me or something like that, there's emotional reactions to that. I'm just as human as anybody else. So I tagged onto that idea, created an irrational situation that says I think everybody should think I'm the best professor they've ever had, and I went through the process of this REBT self-help form and gave you a copy of it. So you can see it here online. Here we go. Look at that. What is the situation you are upset about? A student submitted a negative review of my class. Oh my. What are the unhealthy negative emotions you're experiencing there? Anger, frustration, feelings of failure, imposter syndrome. Oh no, someone discovered I'm actually not as smart as I think I am. Oh, I'm just making this up, but what self-defeating behaviors would you like to change? Sense of negativity toward teaching and my entire career, blah, blah, blah. What demands are you making about the situations? Here's all students should see how good of a professor I am. The dispute is, why should all students recognize me as a good teacher? And the rational belief that I want to replace is, I will accept that my teaching style may not match with what every learner is looking for. So this kind of internal dialogue that you do through this form. So you just go to that link and kind of play around with that. Every statement, the form does not produce any statement. I produced every statement in this report, putting them in the boxes and stuff. But then it spits out this printout kind of thing that gives me the kind of the lowdown in kind of a dialogue with myself. So that's pretty cool. Now, in the world today, it's pretty uncommon for you to look up a therapist and find that they use rationally emotive behavior therapy, because they seem to call it something else now, and that is cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. Probably the most common model for counseling that is available in the general public. It is the same thing, in my opinion. There's very, very little difference. And as I say that, I can't even come up with a difference in terms of the difference between RET and CBT. So I'm going to rest on the fact that I think they're pretty much the same thing. Now, for this week, I would like you to engage in the discussion. The discussion, I'm asking you to give me your opinion about the whole notion of the relationship personality, that there's aspects of our identities that are reserved specifically for relationships. They may be very positive. There may be some very, very important things of somebody's identity that they reserve only for those intimate relationships. But there's also, of course, I was looking to ask some serious clinical questions by coming up with this theory. There's also a negative connotation to ideas that I might reserve insecurities and whatnot having to do with being in a relationship. The assignment is to do this self-help form, to fill it out and then reflect upon it. So I'm essentially asking you, there's a title page and a reflection on your results, just a general couple paragraphs, and then Also, get this form PDF and attach it as well in the Dropbox. And so I can see the whole report. I can see your reflection on it. That's a 2-page paper, title page, and a couple paragraphs reflection on what you found out, whatever you want to write, and then a copy of the actual report. And that brings us to the end of this week. And so I will see you online in that discussion, and have a great week. Take care.